context. You can just
Welcome to Grail Country. This is a kind of a spontaneous live stream. I was kind of like worn out and exhausted today, and Shari asked if I was up to catching up, and I was like, yeah. Well, I mean, heck, we could even live stream. We haven't live streamed together in a really long time, and so here we are. I see Grim is here in the chat. Welcome, Grim. I was just having an interesting exchange with Grim on X, formerly known as the site formerly known as Twitter, where he was talking about the Borg from Star Trek. You familiar?
No.
Okay. So
I mean,
the Borg in Star Trek.
I'm not a boomer. I'm just
Well, this is actually from newer. This is actually not. This is more millennial, actually, or Gen X, because it's from Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's not from the original series.
Yeah.
But the Borg are a race that has like completely integrated with machines, and they don't have any like individual like personality. So they're like part of a collective. And the Borg live in these. They live in these cubes. These giant cubes that travel through space, and they assimilate other people into their collective identity, right? So,
like physically or just metaphorically?
like effectively possession. Like you lose all sense of your own identity. And are just so part of a collective. Yeah,
it's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
And combined with the literal machine, it's like possession by the machine.
Yeah.
Right. And so Grim was saying something about that being kind of like a trajectory that we seem to be actually, embracing. And I said that there was a Star Wars. There's a Star Trek spinoff called Picard. And it was interesting. The first season was not like anything Star Trek at all. It was kind of like dark and cyberpunk kind of a thing. It didn't even feel like Star Trek. And then the second season went completely off the rails. But one of the most troubling storyline was that it tried to make the Borg, when they were originally presented in the Next Generation series, were unambiguously the bad guys, right? They were not good. But in the second season of Picard, it tried to have like a Borg redemption arc where it's like, okay, the Borg are now only going to assimilate, people who choose to be assimilated rather than forcibly assimilated. So now it's okay, right? And this combined with
Calvinism.
Well, and then I like was combining this observation with the fact that like just so many people right now, Elon Musk is a hero. And I can't lose sight of the fact that Elon Musk is the guy who thinks that that's what we ought to do. That we should integrate with our machines.
Yeah.
And that this is a good thing, and that it's the only way to avoid destruction or replacement by artificial intelligence. And then I noticed that have you ever seen an image of a Borg cube?
No.
So I observed that a Borg cube, in terms of the way it looks like a satanic version of the New Jerusalem, because it's this giant cube floating in space. And then I actually found an image. Let me see if I can find it here. I didn't still have the tab open, but see if I can. Yeah, here we go. Let me go to this. So this is actually supposedly someone's vision of the New Jerusalem, where they have consciously merged it with there we go. They've consciously merged it with something that looks like a Borg cube, right? Mm-hmm. So these are the lighter portrayals, right? That look of people imagining, because it's just the way it's described. It's pretty clear that it's describing a 12-sided, or a 12-edged cube is the object that's described in Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and this pretty much, I mean, that pretty much is what a Borg cube looks like. And the description of the image is actually the New Jerusalem. So, yeah.
Interesting. I don't even know.
So hence my claim that it's a satanic image of the New Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's literal Antichrist.
The cube?
Yeah, the image of the Borg cube is literal Antichrist.
It looks like
the continuation. It is the continuation of false life by means of death.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Luke read War in Heaven last week. Cool, Luke.
Yeah, it's a very interesting book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why Grim asked why New Jerusalem is a cube.
Because there's measurements. There's measurements in Revelation.
Right, but he's wondering if there's I think Grimm's question's a little deeper than that. I think Grimm realizes that the way it's described in Revelation, it sounds like it's describing a cube. I think his question is like, why is a cube the image that it portrays? And like, I think that what's his name? The guy from Strange Theology. He was commenting on that thread on X, and he said something about the Holy of Holies also being represented as a cube. So there's something about that. My said there.
My poetic mind is doing backflips at the moment, but I couldn't probably make myself coherent. Because
I would say something about I have this intuition about it being connected to the name of God represented in its Trinitarian aspect. Right?
Well, I think it's
where you have the threefold repetition of 4.
Maybe.
So it's the combination of the ontological principle of the Trinity and the Tetragrammaton.
I'd just be confirmed as a total heretic if I said what I was thinking. So
no, please say it. You gotta take risks.
Well, I can't say it all. That's why I don't know if I should say some of it.
Well, I might be able to help you figure it
out. Well, I'm reading this Magic of the Ordinary book, or I say that because I'm going to finish it in the future. But I got to the second chapter and I'm still thinking about it. And that was a long time ago.
Okay, then if you're still thinking about it, I won't force you to. But I want to hear about it.
I'm still thinking about the second chapter, but what's interesting is that there are levels. Oh, how am I going to say this? There are dimensions, but that sounds too spacey. There are. Oh gosh, see, I'm stuck already. It's like there's an inside, there's an outside, there's 4 directions. There's spatially, there's up and down as well. There's directions east and west, north and south outside of us, but there's also those directions inside. So you essentially have the shape of a cube being described, but what it's describing is a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And the world that they live in, okay?
Yeah, that's good too, because the description of the New Jerusalem in Revelation chapter 21, when it gives the measurements of the and dimensions of it, it also has this line about the measures of being the measure of an angel and a man.
Yeah.
Which is Bulgakov reads that particular part of Revelation 21 as pointing toward the co-humanity of the angels and our co-angelicity.
Yeah, and there was in your conversation that I watched this morning with is Paul Axton, right? Paul is his
Yeah,
name.
Paul Axton. Yeah.
He was learning theology, and it wasn't actually like it felt more like superficial. I think these are my words, not his words. Until he got into the psychoanalysts, and then it got depth, right?
Yeah.
All of the theology got depth, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the interior world and the exterior world, and the way that we keep those things separate. But if you synthesize those two things, then you end up like, I don't know if I could actually read something here to give you an idea of what's floating around in the back of my mind. It's not very long. It's okay, so he's talking about consciousness, and he says 8 degrees of consciousness corresponds in turn to the 4 directions, plus upward, downward, inward, outward, the latter representing total transcendence. In the ancient language of the Jewish people, the 4 directions are referred to as, and pardon me, any Jewish friends watching, Arba Rukot, or the 4 winds, and are not described in terms of latitude or longitude like north, south, east, and west, but in terms of attributes. Right? What we call north is Safon in Hebrew, which means the place of concealment. West is Ma'arav, which means from the place of blending. South is Negev, which means the place of cleansing, or Da'rom, which means the place of rising. And east is Metzrach, which means from the place of shining, or Kedem, which means the place of beginning. And each of the 4 winds are assigned an animal and a color. So I'm not going to read any more than that. But, it's like we're talking about physicality, spirituality, and psychology. And so if you want to take the cube as a physical cube, because there's measurements, like when you were talking about it, I was thinking, you're right, Urizen from Blake's writings, Urizen would love that version of the cube, right? That measurement.
Well, notice I said that the Borg cube is a satanic version of the New Jerusalem. Now, a lot of people who imagine what the New Jerusalem looks like, they will imagine it as a cube because that's what the physical description sounds like. I do not mean to suggest that the meaning of the actual New Jerusalem could be reduced to geometry.
No.
But I don't think that's contradictory with the idea of also having geometry.
But here's the other question, Nate. What's so important about Jerusalem? Jerusalem is where the temple is.
Right.
And what does Jesus say about the temple?
Right.
Yeah. Where's the temple? What does Paul say about the temple? Where's the temple? What is the temple?
We are the temple.
We are the temple. Yeah. So if we are the temple,
but the temple is also the cosmos, which is to say that
there it is. Yeah.
Right, and we are also the cosmos.
Mm-hmm. And it's all actually a temple and a Jerusalem and a cosmos, and like it's all of that. So it's one of those mind-bending things, that you have to.
I did drop the link in the chat for anybody who wants to come and join us. Just as I'm happy to hang out with folks today.
But this is when Jesus says the kingdom of God is within you, I think that's, at least for me, that's the first place I go when these things are described. Then they have to be talking, firstly, for me, this is just my position, they have to be describing something about my interiority, right? My inner in my Father's house are many mansions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. This is a questionable thing here, Nate, that you're going to click on
Mm-hmm.
saying, but you do what you think. I've had encounters in the past.
All right. Hello. Welcome. Hey. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to the discussion?
Not yet.
Okay. I'll go
I
ahead
just
and put you
wanted to
backstage for now then. Just like raise your hand or something if you have something you wanted to say and I'll bring you up. All right.
Yeah, it's caviar.
So,
Yes,
yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this is interesting. My thoughts are going all kinds of places at
I
once.
know. You should have seen
Um,
my brain was like scrambled eggs for 3 days after I read that second chapter in this book.
yeah. It has to do with like, I mean, the first place it goes is to like, it has to go with like the way, um, rethinking what the I is.
Mhm.
If it if we are not simply identifying the I with the ego,
What do you mean, the capital
right?
I or the I?
I mean the capital I.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The expression of identity, um, the I am. Um, I think that we default to assuming that it's the ego, right?
The I am
Yeah,
as
that's why our default perception is our default perception, um, in uh, in this dispensation is to associate that with the ego. That's why we fear death. That's
okay.
the part of us because that's the part of us that can die because it exists in separation, like intentionally in separation.
Okay. I'm
Um,
trying. I'm
uh,
scrambling to keep
well,
along.
it's the part that it is the part of us that insists on identity apart from God.
Yeah. I've always thought of the ego as the infant that we're raising. Like we parent it, right?
Right.
So it comes into the world and it has to grow up. So, and I think that that's exactly what um, Douglas Harding is pointing out when he talks about
Yes.
the
Harding
sage
was very much,
marrying the child,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So somehow, like, because the ego is very much, for most of our lives like that. It's like a little child. It gets hurt, it gets offended, it gets angry, it throws tantrums, it does, it's very much like a child, but it also is able to participate in the world like a child, right?
Yeah, the ego is what when Harding talks about the identification with the reflection in the mirror, right? Like where that is like where when that is your identity, well, that what that is dying and has been dying since the moment it was born and was always inevitably headed toward death. And so if that's all that you can ever that if that's all that you ever identify with, if you can't ever come to accept something as more fundamentally real than that, then that's what causes you to be afraid of death. Because you will cease to exist when that dies.
Yeah, but for me, Nate, there's that, that's kind of like, I'm just assuming that that's a more pessimistic view, and I would take the more optimistic path because.
I'm not being pessimistic, Shari.
Oh, okay.
I think you're taking me the wrong way.
Yeah, I'm just not understanding.
Because I'm saying that identification. What I'm saying is that that identification is a false identification.
That identification of the
that
ego.
That separateness.
Oh, the separateness.
The idea that when the image of what I look at in the mirror is faded and gone and rotting in the grave, that's it. That there will be nothing left of me, is because of a false identification.
Right.
Which is why Harding talks about like we are part of all of what we can observe, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at the sun, well, you probably shouldn't look at the sun for the sake of your eyes. But when you look at the moon, or you look at a galaxy through a telescope, that part of what you are seeing is not disconnected from what you are.
No, and that you have an effect on it, and it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, and that's part of because consciousness is not just, and this is this actually relates directly to the problem of consciousness. So the problem is that we have convinced ourselves. This is why I keep coming back to Barfield, right? Because Barfield is really good on this, because what we have convinced ourselves is that consciousness only exists inside our skulls.
Mm-hmm.
Which you can see why Harding's idea of headlessness is such a good way of wrapping of getting yourself into contact with this, right? Because if consciousness only exists in my head, then I have confined myself to only being my head, my face,
right?
What I appear, this appearance. That's all that I am.
Mm-hmm.
But this is dying, and in my case, quite literally, and not even metaphorically. So, but that's true with everybody. It's all it's been headed toward death since the moment you were born.
Yeah.
That's how this ends, right?
Yeah.
And the only way to lose our fear of death is to realize that this isn't all there is.
Well, this is what I think happened in the garden when God says to Adam, "Who told you you were naked?" Okay, because essentially what happened was he became aware of his body. So before that, there was no awareness that he was here and here.
Right.
He was all here. Okay.
Right.
And then they sin, and he's hiding because he's naked. So now all of a sudden he realizes that there's a this, right, that is shameful.
Yeah.
And the only way that, and if you're looking at it from a mythological point of view, the way that the story is narrated, the only way he can know that he's naked is by looking down. Which is really,
so let's bring
really
this back
significant to me.
Right. So let's bring this back to Paul Axton for a minute, because I've been reading his book, because I'm taking another class from him, and his one of his books is the primary text for the class. The class is like on sin, salvation, and theories of atonement is what the class is. And in the portion of the chapter that I was just reading, he spends a great deal of energy trying to get us to understand that death is the primary problem and the cause of sin, and not the other way around. And this is part of the insight that he got from studying psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I heard him talking.
Considering what Freud has to say about the death drive. And then going back and then applying that to his reading of St. Paul. in the scriptures. And I think that that's fundamentally right.
Yeah, I mean, Heidegger talks about that too. He talks about thrownness towards death, right? That's kind of like our motivation for everything that we do.
Right.
And
It's what causes us to sin
yeah,
is our engagement in this. Well, it's the principle that death is the primary governing principle of the closed world, where survival of the fittest is the rule that dominates.
well, but
And the
then
reason it's able to do that is because it pits us in competition against one another, as if in order for my being to be extended, it has to come at your cost.
yeah, I mean that's one way of doing it.
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, that's like that's not. I'm not. I'm not suggesting that's right. I'm suggesting it's profoundly wrong.
Yeah,
But I'm saying that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a biologist would call it self-preservation, wouldn't he?
right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm on the
Self-preservation.
same.
No. Yeah. Self-preservation. But that's
track.
precisely it. Because right, and that is the self is what in that conception. It's the like the self. The only self in that idea of the self is my biological package, where my identity is one-to-one with this body of death,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm nothing more than that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to say about the garden thing, because I think Jan God said something. Well, wouldn't he only know he's naked if he saw someone with clothes on? The nakedness is not just literal nakedness. It's vulnerability, right? It's actually thrownness towards death. It's knowing that you could die, because here's the thing with human beings, and biologists make this argument all the time. We stand upright and all of our soft belly is exposed. We carry that front and center, right? Whereas animals are four-legged and their soft parts are underneath, protected. So we actually, biologically speaking, walk in a vulnerable position to begin
Right.
with. And so that's interesting, and that's what I like to do with these stories, is think about them in terms of a mythological, like, what is the story telling me about? Is it just saying that Adam has no clothes on and that he feels embarrassed? No, it's talking about the fact that he has to look down at something that he never noticed before, which was his own body. And this is the point that St. Paul makes when he says, the things that I want to do, I don't do, and the things that I don't want to do, I do, right? So what he's talking about there is a mind-body disconnect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I personally think that the only way that you can align those two things, and you can also think about them as heaven and earth, okay?
Right.
A reconciliation of heaven and earth is by turning and facing God, which is code for repentance. Because when you are in a repentant position, your mind and your body become aligned. That's when they work together. The mind says, "Oh yes, I failed, or I need to change the way I think about this," and the body responds with prostrations or weeping or whatever the case might be, right? So, in my estimation, the only time that heaven and earth are reconciled is in repentance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's a mind-body disconnect. And that's why I think in the Old Testament, there's this constant language of turn and face, turn and face, turn and face, right? Which is in the Greek metanoia, which is repentance. So it's a physical turning, but it's also a facing. And we say that about things that we come to realize. We say we faced up to them,
Right. We face up to it. Yeah.
right? That means we can't turn our face away from it anymore. It's kind of like the thing that you see now, see, you can't unsee, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, John Vervaeke makes the argument that that's called bullshitting yourself if that's what you want to do. Oh, look. Yay.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, guys, thought I'd jump in. I'm on a walk.
Yeah, no, happy to see you.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks for joining us.
I'm sure you've got lots of input on this.
Good to see you, Nate. Yeah,
Good
amazing.
to see you too. Looking forward to
Well,
seeing
I've
your
just been
conversation
following
with
for
Rick.
10 minutes, but I've
Yeah.
heard a lot. I've heard a lot. Yeah, I'm walking in a vulnerable position now.
Oh, we might have lost you, Eugene.
Yeah, lost you a little bit there. Hopefully he'll be back. We'd like to hear
I think
from
I
him.
lost connection or something.
Yeah, you kind of
Can you
you
hear
just
me?
came back in for. Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
It seems to be smooth.
Yeah,
now.
I was just going to say, I'm walking. Yeah. I said I was walking in a vulnerable position, upright.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I was
Looking
going to say,
forward-
it's interesting,
Go ahead.
about vulnerability, that this whole idea that when Adam and Eve sinned is, like Shari said, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but to me, it's like Adam and Eve just got this sensation of being separate, this illusion of separation from God.
Yeah.
And this illusion of separation is a very tangible psychological phenomenon. Like when a child feels abandoned,
Yeah.
it's exactly that. All of a sudden, so I mean, it seems like it connects to Barfield, as Nate mentioned.
Yep.
It's really like, if I look at this grass under my feet now, and I don't see myself in it, I'm really a dying person. If I don't see myself in the sun, or anywhere else, even in you guys, I'm dying.
Yeah.
Right.
You
That's
know.
right. Yeah, it's an orientation toward death, and it is this orientation towards death which actually precedes and is the cause of sin, which is why the serpent is already in the garden prior to the temptation. So we are invited into this temptation of an orientation toward death for this promise of false freedom, in being independent of God. That's the whole trap of the entire closed circle.
Well,
that's how it operates.
Jonathan Pajot, I can't remember what conversation it was, but in a recent conversation, I think it was with Eric Axis, actually. That was a great conversation, by the way, if anybody wants to listen. But he talks about how in the garden, God says to Adam and Eve, if you take from the tree, you will die. And the serpent says, you will not die. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane fulfills both of those things. He dies and he doesn't die. And this is really interesting to me, because this is what I think trampling death by death is. Okay? And because of our thrownness towards death, and I mean, this is the whole, well, I won't get into that, but anyway, death has to be resolved. Like St. Paul says, "Oh, death, where is your sting?" Right? Because we think of it as an end. Like somebody in the comments said, it's hard to believe that death is an end, right?
Right.
But what Christ does is shows us that there isn't an end, right? So he dies, but he doesn't die, which is so, like, when Jonathan made that point, I was just like mind blown. It was like,
Mhm.
exactly, that's exactly right. And both of those scenarios happen in a garden, right?
But there's more to it than even that, because
Well, he said more,
what
but
Christ has, right,
not.
but because it's important to realize that Christ, in order to do what he does, has to embrace the very death that we are afraid of, which is the death of this identity that we have carved out, that is separate from God, that we don't want to let go of. That's like, if we don't lay down that life, if we don't lay down that false life, then there is no entry into life proper.
Right. Which is the pouring out of yourself, right? Like that kind of.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the thing about that. If you don't pour yourself out, so, like, I want to get into the fractalness of these statements, okay? Because I find that the most fascinating. So if a man doesn't pour himself out into his wife, there's no conception.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If a man doesn't pour himself out to provide and care for his family, there's no survival.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If a wife doesn't pour herself out and allow her body to transform into a basketball, there's no life, right? If she doesn't pour herself out and quit her job and stay home with her children, there's no guarantee for the future. Like, this is always happening.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that really became apparent to me was that, we talk about the world to come,
Mm-hmm.
and the world to come is a future. And that future is our children. And the metaphor about children always happens in the context of a marriage. And the Bible is about marriage. It's about the marriage of heaven and earth. It's about the marriage of Adam and Eve. It's about the marriage of Christ and the bride. It's all over, if the marriage, if the bride isn't, in the right place, she's whoring, right?
Right.
She's putting herself together with a man who's not her husband. I just want people to think about these things in mythological terms,
Well, yeah. Well, the marriage is the perfect symbol of the life that is not just your own life, right?
Right. And
It is the life that is lived in complete communion with another being. Like, it's pointing us away from the isolation of that we were brought into, and the division that we were brought into by the serpent. Like, that's marriage is is symbolically the only solution to that living in division, because it's a symbol of the joining together.
and the world to come.
Right. Correct. Where you'll have the coincidence of all good opposites.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally, yeah. There's a question here.
Okay.
Can you explain what you mean by seeing yourself in the sun?
That was Eugene.
Oh yeah, it's like I'm walking here in this little park, and as I'm listening to you, I'm asking myself the question, like, why do I need to stop my computer work every once in a while and go out into this park? Because I feel the marriage between heaven and earth here. I feel the outpouring of heaven. onto the earth in the form of the sunshine, and I feel the connection. It's not cognitive. It happens on the feeling level. But that's probably the only reason I need to go and take those breaks, because my soul wants to participate in that marriage. You know, especially when I get distracted or something happens, and I just need to, get restored by,
Yeah.
sensing that, hearing the rustling of the grass here, and because that's this primal sensation of the womb from which I came. So the world, when I see this marriage of heaven and earth in everything, in the sun, in this grass, in the river, in the rocks, I become myself as I once was before the fall of Adam, and I am in Christ,
Mhm.
already.
You're experiencing it as alive, right?
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
not like, your consciousness is experiencing it as alive, and you're not just looking at the objects in your field of vision and saying, "Oh, here's this tree, here's this bird over here." You're perceiving the way in which it is all part of the same glory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to say that you actually are in conversation with it, right?
Yeah, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Because
Right, because the consciousness is no longer just here in the skull.
well, you're not observing it as an object, but it's affecting.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's affecting the
Yeah.
body.
Yeah, I think this is very important, Nate, what you said about Barfields. This whole thing about consciousness being outside of my skull.
Mhm.
And that's just like the first step in connecting with yourself, even,
Yeah.
transcending your ego, because the ego is like a little self,
That's right.
And when I see the consciousness everywhere and I realize, oh, it's the same consciousness as in me, then suddenly I realize I'm bigger than myself. And I have to be bigger than myself to be myself.
Yes.
Because if I equal myself, I always myself. Anyway, I'm getting a call from someone.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll let you take your call.
Okay,
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. I'll go ahead and put you backstage for now. All right.
Yeah.
Father Joe's in the chat.
Yay. Hi, Father
He
Joe.
says he was just reading Barfield on
You
perception.
should
and
jump in,
thinking.
Father Joe. Tell us what you
Yeah.
were reading on Barfield.
I know what he was reading because I lent him the book.
Is Eugene done with his phone call?
Let me see.
Are you done?
Yes, I'm done. It was
Okay, good.
for some reason my sound gets turned off when I get an incoming call, so I got reconnected.
Gotcha. Well, welcome back.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were.
It's good to be back.
You were just making. Yeah, you were just making a point about Barfield and consciousness.
To see. Oh. I'm getting another call. I'll be back, guys. Just a second.
Right, okay. It's so good to see you again, Shari.
He jumps in almost every Lives of the Saints episode with us.
Oh,
yeah.
I haven't had a chance to live stream much lately.
No.
So.
Yeah, I always love it. He wasn't there last week, and we were missing him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What time do you normally do that?
6.
6 o'clock. What
6 o'clock
night?
your time, my time. Yeah, because we're in the same time zone, friend.
Yes, correct. But what day?
The only time zone, just so everyone knows.
What day of the week?
Tuesday.
Tuesdays.
Oh,
that's why that's why I'm not able to do it. I could do it like on non-estuary weeks, though. I could do it.
Oh, you got estuary on Tuesdays?
Yeah, that's my estuary night.
Yeah. I mean, you could watch the.
Yeah, I think he's ready to come back.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome back.
Are you there?
Oh no, I guess not. He's still on his call, I think.
Yeah.
I thought he was indicating that he was done. I was wrong.
If you're ready, Eugene, just wave. Wave.
Yeah, just wave when you're ready.
Oh, he's
Oh,
ready.
okay, he's waving. Go ahead and bring him up. Okay. Hey.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the third time. Sorry. My son
all
was
right.
confused
It's all right.
with the list that I gave him of things to buy. So he,
Ah.
I need your attention. Yeah. So yeah, the consciousness. I forgot my train of thought, but it doesn't really matter. So it's the reconnection that we're all craving. I was saying, yeah, the thing is, if I equal myself, I'm less than myself. I'm not
Right.
quite myself. But if I am more than myself, then I am myself. I can only be myself when I am participating in myself outside of myself, so to say.
Right,
If there is such a thing as outside, which I'm not sure.
and no, but Eugene, that's really important, because if you're going to really take seriously the idea of love as the ontological ground, then you have to start picturing whatever it is that you are as not being isolated in that way. Otherwise you've rendered the very notion of love not only not the ontological ground, but incoherent.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, well, Douglas Harding, I love the way he expresses it when he says that the little child who's in what Barfield would call original participation, when he goes outside to play, he is everything. And you could understand this in the sense that if you say to a little child, you be a velociraptor, they can be a velociraptor. Like in their mind, they embody the velociraptor.
right.
And I used this in a conversation with someone, I don't know, remember which one, but the Aboriginal people in Australia, they have these dances where they mimic the movements of the animals that they hunt, right? Like just down to the finest movements. They pick berries out of the trees. They're doing emus or kangaroos or whatever. But the thing is, when they're doing it, they become the animal. And when they become the animal, they see through the animal's eyes. And you think about this, if you're hunting, then you suddenly know it's like surveillance in the surveillance state that we live in, right? Now you have eyes in the animal. Now you know what's important to the animal, right? And so now as a hunter, you can extract yourself out of the animal, and then you can look for the places that you knew were important to you as the animal, right? The berries that you wanted to eat, or the forage that you were looking for, or the places you lie down to sleep. And so all of the observation that the hunter makes of the animal becomes embodied in the man who imitates the animal, but it teaches him to know where to find his food, essentially. Like he inhabits the consciousness of the animal. Anyway, I'm getting off track, but Douglas Harding goes in, he says that what happens to the teenager is they believe the parent who says to the little child, Bobby, that's you in the mirror. Because the little child will say, okay, but it's not really them in their mind. But then the teenager looks in the mirror and says, that is me. And that's the lie, right? And he describes it as, he says, no wonder teenagers are so angry, because their world goes from this to this, right? So they are the whole world, like you're describing, Eugene, in the park. And when they believe the lie in the mirror, that's who they are, they've shrunk their world.
Mhm.
Right, and this and that movement, that shrinking down of the world and reduction of the self to identification with the ego alone is what drives us toward addiction and sin, and it's because its fundamental orientation is toward death.
Yeah.
It's
You know,
it's what that Vervaeke talks about reciprocal narrowing and reciprocal opening. Those are actually really good ways of like just getting the basic concept that is at play here, because that's your idea of yourself can either be oriented toward a reciprocal narrowing, focused on the ego, or it can be reciprocally opening and reconnect itself to other people and the world.
Mhm.
you know, Father Joe says the same thing happens in the liturgy. So what's interesting about that is the liturgical calendar. Hi,
Hey,
Cody.
Cody.
The
Nice to meet you.
liturgical calendar also puts you like, so you're basically imitating, let's say, like the Aboriginal in Australia. He imitates the animals that he's hunting. In the liturgical calendar, you imitate the passion of Christ, right? You imitate, you know, you're basically imitating a present moment so that you're embodied in it. And that's how you can understand it. That's why I think it's so true that you can't really criticize something from the outside. That statement, right? You can look at the facade and you can say the facade is falling off. You can say those kinds of things. But to understand what's going on the inside, you have to inhabit it, right? But anyways.
Yeah, that's
Go ahead.
interesting that I read somewhere that the Greek word for the critic, kritikos, initially meant a discerner, and only later it acquired this meaning of actually criticizing someone. But if you are a discerner, it means you have to see something in a thing before saying something about it.
Right.
And
Interesting.
like if I see something in a painting, then I'm able to say something about it. Or in a person, I have to connect with that and discern before I am, the criticos,
Yeah.
in the original sense of the word.
Yeah. Cody, did you have a thought?
Oh, I always have thoughts. And yeah, I was thinking about some of the prior conversation about the outpouring of ourself into this sort of relational communion that you were speaking of, about the husband pouring himself out for the wife, the father pouring himself out for the family, the wife pouring herself out for the survival of the family, and the pouring herself out for forsaking a career, for protecting the future. Like these concepts are really speaking to me. And even in a conversation that I had with my wife just probably about 30 minutes ago, we were talking about I was blessed enough this year to receive a promotion at work, and she's like, great, you did great work. And I was like, we did great work. And she's like, well, I didn't do anything. I was like, that's just not how I see it. I don't see that I've done anything. And I think that you spoke to a truth that resonates in me, is when I see the joy that comes out of the outpouring of my life into hers. Like that's where real life is actually happening. That's where communion is happening to this degree that, in some sense, that's really the only validity of what actually breathes in a relationship. And I just thought that was quite beautiful. And like that's where the life of God exists, right in the Trinity. that there's this, I think it was Fulton Sheen. I think it was Fulton Sheen who sort of gives an illustration of the father and the son sighing towards each other, and that expression of the sighing is the proceeding of the Holy Spirit. And it's an illustration, obviously, and I think that's one that a lot of people have heard before, but there is this outpouring of God to us at all times. That's quite beautiful, even to the imagination. It'll never capture it, but in a sense, it's like what Eugene was talking about. He's conversating, or you said that he's conversating with the transcendent. He is having a conversation with what is beyond, but also so close at the same time. Just purely beautiful. By the way, I'm honored to talk with you guys here at Grail Country, because I came over here from searching around and listening to Chris Green, and so he led me here, and I'm glad to be here. So thanks for letting me come on and talk.
Glad to see you, Cody.
Nice to have you.
I thought what you said was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah,
no, that's good. And actually, I'm glad that you were able to see that, right? Because I don't think at your age, I don't think that is a life lesson I hadn't learned yet. I didn't marry as well the first time around as I did the second time around, but certainly, like, there is nothing that I do positively in my life now that I would not give credit to my wife, Shari Eve, as being a part of. There's not, like, all the good that I do is completely inseparable from that, really, seriously. Like, it enables so much of it. So that's I found that very moving. So
yeah, Cece's asking here, how critical is the understanding the Trinity to Christianity? I would say this: don't try to understand the Trinity, okay? Because and this is how it is for me with the Theotokos as well, and the incarnation and the cross and the resurrection. These are things that have to reveal themselves to you. And so in order to understand them, you have to be in conversation with the cosmos, because, well, I'm not going to say why, because that's getting too explicit already. But
no, that's good. It's funny, Shari, because you went in a completely different direction with that. Because my initial impulse was to say yes. I don't think that you can make sense of reality without arriving at what I would say is a fundamental intuition of the Trinity.
Well, the only
however, it's an intuition.
Let me just clarify.
So,
Just clarify. The reason I said that is because if you try to look at something too closely, sometimes it fades away and you can't see it anymore. Okay? These kinds of things have to be seen in the periphery. And I learned that from my great uncle, George MacDonald.
No, I'm really glad that you did say it that way, because I fundamentally agree with you, because it depends on what the person means by understand, right? If you mean by understand, do you mean grasp intellectually with perfect certainty? If that's what you mean, then I would say 100% agree with Shari. Don't try.
Don't even.
Because that is actually going to undo more than it's going to do. But I would say that it can be known. It can be known.
Oh yeah, it can be known, but it can only be known in the way that a man knows his wife. Let me say that. And this is what Stephen's saying. To understand the love of the Trinity, one must increase their capacity to love.
Right. Well, and love is actually the action which allows us to know the Trinity, because loving and knowing are ultimately the same thing.
Yeah.
and that it is, and that we we increase in love and knowledge, which are ultimately the same thing, through the process of loving. So, which is to engage in the life of the Trinity itself.
Which
So
is to
the way to understand the Trinity is to act like the Trinity acts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, there's this.
you'll just see it everywhere. Sorry, Cody, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's this. It's kind of getting at the picture that I was drawing from earlier, that there's this love that is expressed toward the other. And I think in trying, like you said, Shari, trying to understand the Trinity as like some kind of, I don't know, something like transcendent and geometric at the same time just doesn't work, right? We don't have that kind of imagination, but the imagination we do have comes from how we experience relationship through the Holy Spirit already, and that is that we are known, and God knows us as he knows himself, and we are being brought into that knowing. We are being brought into that being known more and more every day through our renewal. And it's like when you try to understand the Trinity, it's like being on the beach, but I just kind of have this picture in my mind. You're trying to hold all the sand in your hand, but what you really need to do is just lay in the sand,
Right.
because it's all there. You have to let yourself be enveloped by the concept of how big and how good and how great God is in comparison to what we do in attempts to control him, because then we're just making him like ourselves, right? He has to be beyond us in the way that we can also trust how beyond he is for our good. You know, as Romans 8:28 says, he's always working for the good of those who love him. But he's working for the good of everything. He's not working for anything but for the fact that he's the source of goodness, and that's what he does, and that's who he is. So it's beyond concept, but we can trust the beyondness of it.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
one of the things that I realized and that I like to challenge Christians with is that Trinitarianism is older than Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
It just is.
Well, yeah.
It's the understanding that ancient people had about a Trinitarian quality to reality is older than Christianity. And it doesn't mean Christianity co-opted it either. So
one of the things I think that is, I kind of agree with Jason, but it's like it is simple as long as you don't expect it to be reducible to propositions, right?
Mhm.
So I would agree that there is a simplicity to it, and that it's easy to understand, but the way to approach it is not through rational argumentation or intellectual abstraction. I just don't think that's the way into it.
Or to quote you from your conversation with Paul Axton, it's not dead words on a page.
Right. Well, so there's something that Barfield talks about that I actually think is helpful here to understanding like the way in which we can understand the Trinity, because Barfield talks about how we have a tendency to not realize that we can distinguish without dividing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what that is what the Trinity is.
That's what
it is. There's no division within the Trinity. God is one. It contains no division, but the persons are distinct. And that's why when Eugene is talking about feeling his connection to the sun and to the grass and to the trees, he's not talking like a Borg-like assimilation, right? Because he's still able to distinguish, but yet there's an underlying unity. So that's why that's the difference between the sort of like diabolical assimilation that wants to possess you, as opposed to the life that God is calling us into. There's a seeming similarity there that you can twist around. Actually, in Paralandra, C.S. Lewis does a really good job and putting this kind of vision in the word in the speech of the unman, where the unman kind of vacillates between this absolute isolating individualism and this like obliterating collectivism, and he's tempting, and he wants to tempt the Green Lady in one of those two directions. But what the Trinity represents is something that's neither that reducing everything to an absolute monad, or to have everything into just like a unity without distinction.
Mm-hmm.
What the Trinity points toward is a unity that still maintains distinction. And so that when we enter into Christ, you're not less Eugene. You're more Eugene. When I enter into Christ, I'm not less Nate, I'm more Nate. And so on. And same thing for you, Cody and Shari. So that's why I think the Trinity is inevitable in that sense. Like, because that is the ground reality that it is pointing toward as a dogma. And that is the reality that we're being called to have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Yeah. So to recap, in my simple understanding, what the Trinity is teaching is that we need to see the world as distinct without division. And I think that this is why, or not the world, but creation, let's say, keep it general. I think this is why God hates divorce.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that he doesn't want people to get divorced, which he probably doesn't either. It doesn't mean you can't get divorced. But what he hates is breaking apart, the dividing, right? The thing that is unified and yet distinct. That's the image, that God creates. Male and female created he them, right? In his image. And so, I mean, just that statement alone is male and female. Those are completely distinct, but they're both in his image. So it's a distinction without a division. And so, the statement, I've talked to Joseph about this recently. He's like, oh, you couldn't have picked a more controversial thing. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm just seeing it as God expressing his disdain for, and I would say, criticism.
Well, look how devastating it is to people, Shari.
Well,
look how devastating it is.
Right.
People who have gone through a divorce
totally
will tell you that it is worse than death.
Right. But let's just all that aside for now, so we don't get stuck in the weeds of life and the difficulties people have, right? But if you just think about it in terms of distinction without division, and that is God's heart, that reflects back to me the reconciliation of all things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it also strengthens Ian McGilchrist's argument against criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Because what Eugene was saying earlier,
well, that's something he shares with Tom Berg. Tom Berg absolutely has no truck with polemic whatsoever. He despises it.
Yeah, well, the problem, like McGilchrist, I haven't read his book. He wrote a book when he was young called Against Criticism, because that was his first insight into the left hemispheric domain of just literalness, not seeing an underlying unity in things, right? And so what you're doing when you do that kind of criticism is you divide. And this is exactly what diabolos means. It means to cast apart, right? And symbolos.
And symbolon is the opposite. Yeah.
Well, and that is the nature of the initial temptation too, is to become a separate self, to be divided, to live in accordance with the closed circle, disconnected from everything else, and closed in upon the self. Like that's and that is our orientation toward death. That is our identification with the ego.
Yeah, to be like Cain.
To be like Cain, exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, what's interesting about this whole conversation about distinction and unity without dividing, without division. That's what true community of believers actually allows us to feel on a really visceral level.
Right.
Because when people in the body of Christ are able to connect, truly connect with each other, they do feel this moment when they realize, oh, we're one. There's this oneness, but there's almost like a desire to see the other person as separate at the same time. Because I really enjoy like listening to you, Nate. I really enjoy like listening to you, Shari. And I don't want neither of you to become me in the full sense of the word.
Right.
I don't want this merging at all. In
Right.
fact, I want this distinction. The more unity I feel, the more I want the distinction to become more and more distinct. You know,
Yeah.
and that's a paradox, but it's a paradox very Trinitarian. I was going to say when Cody
Yeah,
was sharing,
because that's the very soul. That's the very soul of cooperation itself, right? Which is like, Tom Tomberg, says that although horizontal evolution proceeds in accordance with survival with survival of the fittest, right?
mhm,
Vertical evolution, which is our growth into the true life, that is defined by the cooperation for existence. And of course, it would be characteristic of it would not be cooperative at all for me to want to absorb you into my own being, right? That would be the very opposite of cooperation.
Oh,
that's
that's
what Diabolos
To have a
does.
truly right, exactly. To have a truly cooperative spirit, I have to see a unity that doesn't obliterate distinction, where your joy is my joy, and your pain is my pain too. Until we reach to the point where there is no more suffering and pain. Like, part of that is going to be tears, because we're going to sense one another's pains more, as well as our triumphs and joys. But we shouldn't want it any other way, because that's a sign that we're actually becoming alive.
What was it, Eugene, you were going to say that you were thinking of?
Oh, I was thinking, yes, that the only way to know Trinity, as Nate was just now explaining in a experiential way, is to stand under it. Understand is to stand under it. And it's interesting that when the church fathers were thinking about the three persons in the Trinity, the word they chose for a person was, I forgot what it is in Greek, but it basically means to stand under, because they meant, that there's something that stands under the way that, each person reveals himself in the world. But anyway, I was just thinking, that I mean, the only way to know the rain is to stand under the rain.
Right.
It's not to understand the rain. But, and I was going to say also, when Cody mentioned this, remember he said about something about breathing, the Holy Spirit is being like breathed into from the Father. Just yesterday, my wife and I, we watched this old Soviet movie about a guy who it happens like 10 years after the World War II. And he is basically like alone. His wife died, etc., all kinds of things. And he is a gypsy guy. So he has, a lot of adventures. But at the end, he finds this orphan boy, and he decides to adopt him, which, in the gypsy world, it's like you don't need any documents. You just grab him. And if his caregivers are okay with that, and they were okay. And so this boy is first hesitant. I mean, is he going to be good to me? But then they show how they go to swim in the river. And it just broke me. I just cried, because he picked that boy up and he just threw him in the water. And then he just, like looked into his eyes, and you could see that the boy was looking into his eyes and standing under
Right.
the outpouring of love.
Yeah.
And it was such an incredible moment that really, really predates Christianity, I guess.
Right.
Totally does.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that must
Well,
be
but that shouldn't scandalize. That shouldn't scandalize us, right? Because right, one would assume that the Trinity predates Christianity.
oh, definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
you know,
That's
so
also interesting. As the when you think about understanding and being in submission to authority, and the husband being a covering for the wife.
mhm.
There's, I don't have any, like, I can't expand on that. It just came to me when you were talking, Eugene, that there's something about that too. And there's a really beautiful part of confession in Orthodoxy that where the priest, he wears a different, like a shawl kind of thing for confession, but it's used as a covering. So he covers you with it while you make your confession. He stands with you and he covers you, right? And
I want to address this question of the meaning of hypostasis really quick. So it's like literally, it means like the dregs or the residue. So I think that's why people are wanting to link it to the idea of standing under, because it has to do with like sediment, right? But I think that actually Dawn here is closer to when talking about foundation, is probably closer to the meaning. But the important thing about hypostasis, though, is that hypostasis is always a who, right?
yeah,
So when we talk about God as being trihypostatic, we are talking about who God is, right? So we're not turning God into a thing or an object,
you're not talking about how God is,
right? We're talking about who God is.
who God is.
And I think a lot of what we've been saying in this conversation is the real is we're pointing at the reality is that everything comes from this mystery of person and is moving further into this mystery of person, and that the less we think of things as what's and more as who's, the better our thinking will be about everything,
Including the sun.
including
Yes.
the sun, 100% including the sun, and
Well, we know from Lewis there's more to the sun than meets the eye.
right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I think Rupert Sheldrake wrote a whole paper on whether the sun has consciousness.
Oh, really?
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Yes, he does. Yeah,
Yeah.
he actually
Makes a very good argument. So
yeah. Well, consciousness is not it's not a separate phenomenon, it's not just a,
yeah.
it's
Yeah, I mean,
Barfield says it's the inside of the world, and I think that's right.
even Goethe believed that light doesn't just come into your eyes, it comes out of your eyes.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, it's kind of the problem science has with the problem of the observer. If you think about it in those terms, right? There is the light of who you are is interfering with what it is you're looking at. So in science, they have a serious issue with observing things. They want to observe it so that they can document it and they can prove it and measure it. But as soon as they do that, they interfere with
So
it.
this is good, Shari. I almost brought this up earlier, but this is something that I have been thinking a lot lately. When I was preparing for my conversation with Derek Holzer from The Plunge, one of the things that I told them that I wanted to talk about was about what Barfield says about the myth of Odin hanging on the world tree in poetic diction. And in the process of thinking about that, it occurred to me that essentially that the myth of Odin hanging on the world tree and the pattern that we see in the story in the 3rd chapter of Genesis are actually the same pattern. Both are different ways of talking about the fall into ego consciousness that sees itself as the center of power and will and control, and the world as a collection of objects to be manipulated and grasped.
Mm.
It's the same pattern.
Same-
It's a very different way of telling it, but it's the same pattern. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the power that Odin gains. He sacrifices an eye. And it's the lower eye only that he's seeing with in order to gain. Like anytime that your orientation is toward power, it is the lower eye which is orienting your vision.
Mm.
So, and that's why science and sorcery are ultimately the same impulse. But that's which isn't to demonize science. This is why I like Barfield, right? Because Barfield is like, no, and Tomberg gets this too, because Tomberg, it's funny, he has this passage where he talks about how, the downsides of the lower eye vision of science, which Barfield would equate with the withdrawal of participation. He talks about the harm that does to us as we condition ourselves to this. But he also talks about how science has given us a lot of wonderful things that the theologians and saints and mystics of the Middle Ages were not able to give us, because they also were one-eyed and were only looking with a higher eye. And so I think Barfield is right to call us into not back to original participation, right? Which he equates in saving the appearances simply with paganism. But the idea is for us to reintegrate ourselves and become two-eyed, so that we don't lose the benefits that we have gained from the scientific revolution and the withdrawal of participation, which is part of our evolution of consciousness for a reason. It's like it has downsides and consequences, but it's not meaningless. It's a part of our journey toward becoming reintegrated, dual-eyed, true-seeing creatures.
I'm almost tempted to ask the question that will open the Pandora box about is it possible with AI, which is something I've been brooding on, but I don't know if I should be going there.
I'll speak out of school a little bit. I had a private conversation the other night with Jonathan Demure and Chris from Waves of Obsession. And Chris was talking to Chat GPT. Now, I couldn't phrase you his perfect question, but I did say to him, the key to getting this kind of information from Chat GPT is you have to ask the right question. And that is what the imagination is for. The imagination is not to find the good answer. It's to ask the right question. Okay. And so, but anyway, he asked ChatGPT something about the difference between, him, Chris, and ChatGPT. But it was a much more nuanced and beautifully complex little question that he had. But ChatGPT came back and said, I'm not like you, because I don't, all I can do is spit out information that you have fed into me, you as humanity, right? Generally speaking. And I don't have the ability to feel or intuit. And so I cannot find a fundamental unity to anything, is what it said.
And amazing.
And
how humble of him.
I said, well, you know what I said? I was like, wait a minute. Okay, in order to be a whole person, what is it that you actually need? Feeling and intuition, which are the two things that most people are like, well, that's, you just need to be able to think and calculate and measure, right? But according to Chat GPT, which is what it can do, it's limited in its ability, because it can't feel, and it used those words, it can't feel and intuit. I said to Chris, I'm hoping he makes a video and includes that conversation that he had, because it was just fascinating. But there was something else I was going to say.
Do you remember the Ukrainian programmer who was part of our Slavic folktales episode that we did a while back?
I do remember him.
So he actually works in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and he was very much like wanting to direct himself toward stewarding AI in a positive direction as much as possible. He's a devout Orthodox Christian, and he was very dedicated to like trying to move AI toward more of an angelic potential and less of a demonic potential. Basically,
That's very interesting. Yeah.
and of course, he had a much more sophisticated way of putting it because he actually works in AI and machine learning. But he made an impression on me. I had some long conversations about it with him when I met him at the Symbolic World Conference. But so there are Christians who are working in that field who
Definitely, yeah.
at least have a desire to try to shepherd AI toward something else. But I just don't. I just think it's a fun based on a fun. I personally, as noble as that impulse is, and I actually still think it's based on an incorrect model of consciousness. But as I have a really bright younger sister who's like a kind of a physics nerd and an artist and deeply imaginative person, and she's much more into AI than I am. And her argument is essentially like that if something like panpsychism, and you can imagine a non-materialist version of panpsychism, right? That's if we grant the potential truth of a non-materialist version of panpsychism, then even though it might be beyond our technical capability to generate consciousness, that AI could become conscious anyway, without us being the cause of it.
Well, what Stephen says here, AI can show those who forgot what a human is what a human is. That was the sense that I got when he read me the answer that he got from ChatGPT, because he actually missed the connection, as far as I could tell, that ChatGPT had actually elevated intuition and feeling in that answer.
Michael, Eugene talked to Derek too, so you'll get to see that one as well.
Yes, it was so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to leave, but I need to go.
Oh, it was really a nice surprise to have
really
you
great.
pop on the stream.
We missed you last Tuesday.
Yeah, I was like watching with one eye. I couldn't make it.
Okay. All good.
Sure. Yeah, I'll see you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
All right. I think this is a good place for me it was good to be with you again, Shari. This is a good place for me to call it a wrap so that I can take a little power nap before my class tonight.
Yeah.
So, very good to be with you again. Thank you everyone for joining us on the stream. Hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.